The gunshot echoed across the vast expanse of the Montana Territory as Elizabeth Winters ducked behind the weathered barn door, her heart pounding in her chest like a cavalry drum. The year was 1876, and for a widow with two small children in the unforgiving town of Verde, each day was a fight for survival. She pressed her back against the rough-hewn planks, listening to the approaching footsteps of the man who just saved her family's meager homestead from a pack of rustlers intent on stealing their last 2 cows. "Madam, they're gone now," came a deep voice, steady as the mountains that framed the western sky. "You and your little ones can come on out." Elizabeth peered around the door, her amber eyes meeting the steady gaze of a tall stranger. Dust clung to his leather vest and denim pants, and a week's worth of beard shadowed his sun-bronzed face. He holstered his pistol with practiced ease, the silver star pinned to his chest catching the afternoon light. I don't know how to thank you," she stammered, pushing a strand of copper hair back beneath her bonnet. Behind her skirts, her 5-year-old son Henry clutched at the fabric while 3-year-old Mary sucked her thumb, wide-eyed. "No need for thanks, madam. Name's Frank Xavier. Most folks just call me Frank." He tipped his hat, revealing eyes the color of a summer storm. "I've been tracking those men for 3 days. They've hit half a dozen farms across the territory." Elizabeth smoothed her worn calico dress, suddenly aware of how shabby she must look. "I'm Elizabeth Winters. These are my children, Henry and Mary." She swallowed hard. "My husband, he passed last winter, pneumonia." Frank's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mrs. Winters. Please call me Elizabeth." She straightened her shoulders, determined not to appear as desperate as she felt. "Would you care for some coffee? It's the least I can offer." Inside the small cabin, Elizabeth busied herself at the iron stove while Frank sat at the rough-hewn table, hat placed respectfully beside him. The children watched him with undisguised curiosity from their corner by the hearth. "You've done well for yourself here," Frank commented, his eyes taking in the modest but tidy home. "Can't be easy on your own." "We manage," Elizabeth replied, though the tremble in her voice betrayed her. The truth was far more dire. The banknote was due in 3 weeks, and without Jacob's steady hand to work the fields, they were falling behind. Each night, she lay awake wondering how much longer they could hold on. Frank sipped the strong, bitter coffee. "These rustlers, they've been getting bolder. Town Marshal in Helena asked me to lend a hand. I was a Texas Ranger before I came north." "Will you be staying in Verde long?" Elizabeth found herself asking, surprised at her own forwardness. "Just until I catch the rest of this gang." He studied her face. "Unless there's reason to stay longer." That evening, after Frank had gone to set up camp by the creek that bordered her property, Elizabeth tucked her children into bed in the small room they shared. "Mama," Henry whispered as she smoothed his hair, "is that man going to help us?" Elizabeth kissed his forehead. "He already has, darling." "But Papa's gone," Mary said, her small face solemn in the lamplight. "And Mr. Donovan at the bank said we might have to leave." Elizabeth's throat tightened. She tried to shield them from the worst of their troubles, but children had a way of understanding more than adults gave them credit for. "Don't you worry about Mr. Donovan," she said, forcing a smile. "God provides." Later, sitting alone on the porch steps, Elizabeth stared at the distant flicker of Frank's campfire. A coyote called from the ridge, its mournful cry seeming to echo the loneliness in her heart. She didn't hear Frank approach until his shadow fell across the moonlit yard. "Forgive me for intruding," he said, "but I saw you sitting here alone." "Sometimes it's easier to think when the children are asleep," she admitted. Frank sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Those rustlers knew your husband was gone," he said quietly. They pick their targets carefully. Elizabeth nodded. Everyone knows. In a town this small, there are no secrets. How much longer can you hold on here? The directness of his question startled her. For months, she'd maintained a brave face for everyone, her children, the townspeople, even herself. But something about this stranger's calm presence cracked her carefully constructed facade. "The bank will take everything in 3 weeks," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I've tried everything, taking and mending, selling eggs, working the fields myself after the children are asleep. But it's never enough." Frank was silent for a long moment. "I've been drifting since the war," he finally said. 12 years of going wherever the wind and trouble take me." "That sounds lonely," Elizabeth observed. "It is." His voice held no self-pity, just simple acknowledgement. "But lately I've been thinking it might be time to put down roots." The following morning, Elizabeth woke to the sound of an axe splitting wood. She dressed quickly and found Frank already stacking neatly cut logs beside the cabin. "You don't have to do this," she protested, though relief flooded through her at the sight of the woodpile that would see them through at least part of the coming winter. "Got to earn my coffee," he replied with a slight smile. "Besides, I figured you could use a hand while I'm waiting for word from the marshal about those rustlers." Throughout the day, Frank repaired the sagging fence, patched a leak in the roof, and helped Elizabeth turn the soil in her small vegetable garden. The children followed him like shadows, Henry particularly fascinated by the tall man's every move. "Mr. Frank, can you show me how to shoot a gun?" the boy asked during lunch. "Henry," Elizabeth scolded. "That's not appropriate to ask." Frank set down his fork. "Your mother's right, son. Guns aren't toys. But if she permits, I can show you how to set a rabbit trap. A man should know how to put food on the table." The boy's face lit up, and Elizabeth felt a pang of gratitude mixed with sadness. Jacob had been gone only 8 months, but already Henry was starved for a man's guidance. Days passed, and Frank remained at the Winters homestead. Word came from Helena that most of the rustling gang had been captured, but Frank seemed in no hurry to leave. He slept in the small barn, rose before dawn to tend to chores, and spent his days making improvements to the property that Elizabeth could never have managed alone. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant orange and pink, Elizabeth found the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "Why are you really staying, Mr. Xavier?" Frank turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Because for the first time in a long while, I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be." "I can't pay you for your work," she said, embarrassment coloring her words. "I'm not asking for payment." "Then what are you asking for?" He was silent for so long that Elizabeth thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Maybe a chance to be more than a drifter with a gun." The following Sunday, Elizabeth and the children dressed in their best clothes for church. To her surprise, Frank appeared from the barn in a clean shirt and freshly brushed hat, offering to drive them to town in the wagon he'd repaired. The small white church at the edge of Verde was already filled when they arrived, and Elizabeth felt the weight of curious stares as she walked down the aisle with Frank beside her and the children following. "Looks like Elizabeth Winters finally found herself some help," she overheard Mrs. Peterson whisper to her husband. After the service, as they stood in the churchyard, Pastor Gillespie approached with a warm smile. "It's good to see you, Elizabeth. And who is your friend?" Before she could answer, Frank stepped forward, extending his hand. "Francis Xavier, pastor. I've been helping Mrs. Winters with some repairs." "Mr. Xavier is a former Texas Ranger," Elizabeth added, oddly proud of the fact. The pastor's eyes widened with recognition. "Not the same Xavier who brought in the Willoughby brothers back in '69. Frank nodded modestly. That was a lifetime ago, sir. Well, we're grateful to have a man of your caliber in our community, Pastor Gillespie said, even if it's just temporary. As they prepared to leave, Elizabeth noticed Everett Donovan, the bank manager, watching them from across the churchyard, his expression calculating. A chill ran down her spine, knowing that in just over 2 weeks he would have the legal right to take everything she and Jacob had worked for. That night, after the children were asleep, Elizabeth found Frank sitting on a stump near the barn, whittling a small wooden horse. "For Henry," he explained, holding up the nearly finished carving. "Every boy should have a horse, even if it's just a wooden one." Elizabeth sat beside him, drawing her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "You're good with them, the children, I mean. They're good children, you've done well by them." "I try." She hesitated, then added, "Jacob was a good father, he loved them very much." Frank nodded, respecting the memory of the man who had come before him. "Tell me about him." And so Elizabeth did, the words spilling out like water from a spring. She told Frank about meeting Jacob when she was just 17, about their wedding day and the journey west from Pennsylvania, about his laugh and his dreams for their land. And finally, about those terrible last days as fever consumed him, leaving her alone with 2 small children and a mountain of debt. When she finished, tears streaked her face, but they were healing tears, the first she'd allowed herself since Jacob's death. "He sounds like a fine man," Frank said softly. "You and the children were lucky to have him." "Yes," Elizabeth agreed. "We were." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. "Frank," she said, using his given name for the first time, "what happens when you catch all those rustlers?" His hand stilled on the wooden horse. "I'm not sure anymore." The following day, Elizabeth walked into town to sell eggs at the general store. As she was leaving, Everett Donovan stepped out from his office across the street, intercepting her path. "Mrs. Winters," he greeted her, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I trust you're well, Mr. Donovan." Elizabeth nodded politely, though her heart had begun to race. "Yes, thank you. I couldn't help but notice your guest at church yesterday." His tone made the word sound improper. "Rather sudden, isn't it? Mr. Xavier has been very kind to help with repairs around our property." Elizabeth kept her voice steady. "As you know, there's always work to be done, indeed." Donovan adjusted his gold watch chain. "I also couldn't help but notice that your payment is due in 12 days. I assume you're prepared to meet your obligations." "I'm doing my best, Mr. Donovan." "Your best may not be sufficient, I'm afraid." His voice lowered. "However, I might be willing to renegotiate terms, perhaps over dinner at my home. I'm a widower myself, as you know." Elizabeth stepped back, disgusted by his implication. "I'll have your payment, Mr. Donovan. Good day." As she hurried away, her cheeks burning with indignation, she nearly collided with Abigail Foster, the schoolteacher. "Elizabeth," Abigail steadied her with a gentle hand. "Are you all right? You look upset." Elizabeth glanced back to make sure Donovan wasn't following. "It's nothing. Just bank business." Abigail's kind face showed understanding. "Is there anything I can do to help? The children will be starting school next month, and I'd be happy to arrange for their books." "That's very kind, but—" Elizabeth broke off as a commotion erupted from the saloon down the street. 2 men burst through the batwing doors, fists flying, followed by several others shouting encouragement. "Oh dear," Abigail sighed. "This town could certainly use a proper lawman." Elizabeth watched as the town's elderly constable hobbled toward the fight, clearly outmatched. Without thinking, she said, "Frank, Mr. Xavier was a Texas Ranger." Abigail's eyes widened. "The man staying at your place. I had no idea. Perhaps the town council should speak with him." By the time Elizabeth returned home, Frank had repaired the chicken coop and was teaching Henry how to nail boards properly. The boy's face was alight with concentration as he carefully positioned a nail. "That's it, steady now," Frank guided. "A man's work stands the test of time." Something warm unfurled in Elizabeth's chest at the sight. This was what her son had been missing, what both her children needed. A man's steady hand and patient instruction. That night, after a simple supper of rabbit stew courtesy of Henry's first successful trap, Elizabeth told Frank about her encounter with Donovan. His expression darkened. "He had no right to speak to you that way." "He holds the note on this property," Elizabeth said resignedly. "In his mind, that gives him all the rights in the world." Frank set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "How much do you owe him?" $217. The sum hung between them, insurmountable as a mountain. "I see." Frank's face gave nothing away. "Also," Elizabeth added, changing the subject, "Miss Foster, the schoolteacher, suggested the town might be interested in your services. As a lawman, I mean. Constable Miller is nearly 70 and—" Frank nodded slowly. "I'll ride into town tomorrow, see what they have to say." The following morning, Frank dressed in his cleanest clothes and pinned his old ranger badge to his vest before riding to Verdi. Elizabeth spent the day anxiously waiting for his return, alternating between hope and fear. If he took a position in town, he might stay, but would it be enough to save their home? It was nearly dusk when Frank returned, his expression thoughtful as he dismounted by the barn. "Well?" Elizabeth asked, unable to contain her curiosity. "They offered me the job of town marshal." He removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "The pay's not much, $40 a month plus room behind the jail. Are you going to accept?" Frank looked at her directly. "I told them I'd think on it." That evening, as they sat by the fire after the children were asleep, Frank seemed lost in thought. Finally, he spoke. "I wasn't completely honest with you, Elizabeth." She felt a flutter of alarm. "About what?" "About why I came north. I didn't just follow those rustlers because the marshal asked." He stared into the flames. "I killed a man in Texas. It was a fair fight. He drew first, but his family was wealthy, connected. They put a price on my head." Elizabeth's hand flew to her throat. Are you in danger?" "Not immediately. But eventually someone might come looking. That's why I've kept moving all these years." He met her eyes. "I want you to know who I am before." "Before what?" Frank leaned forward, his face earnest in the firelight. "Elizabeth, I've been alone a long time, too long. These past weeks, being here with you and the children, it's shown me what I've been missing." Elizabeth's heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "Frank, let me finish, please." He took a deep breath. "I have some money saved. Not much, but enough to cover your bank note with some left over to invest in this place. New livestock, seed for next year." "I can't accept that," Elizabeth protested, though hope flared painfully in her chest. "You can if it comes with me." Frank's voice was steady, but she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "I'm asking if there might be a place for me here, Elizabeth, not just as a hired hand, but as—" "As what?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. "As a husband to you, a father to your children." Elizabeth's breath caught. "This is very sudden." "I know it is. I'm not asking for love, not yet. That might come with time, or it might not. But I'm offering partnership, protection, a chance for all of us to have a family again." "The children barely know you," she said, though her objection sounded weak even to her own ears. "Children adapt, and I think they already trust me, at least a little." Elizabeth rose, needing distance to think clearly. "I need time, Frank. This isn't a decision to make lightly." "Of course." He stood as well, respectful of her space. "I'll be leaving for town early tomorrow. The council wants an answer about the marshal position. I'll be back by supper and we can talk more then." That night, Elizabeth lay awake, her mind churning with possibilities. Frank was kind, hardworking, good with the children. And there was something else, a warmth in her chest when he was near, a feeling she'd thought had died with Jacob. But marriage, to a man she'd known less than a month, a man with a price on his head. Yet without his help, she would lose everything. The children would lose their home, the only security they had left. Morning came too quickly, and Elizabeth had still not decided when she heard Frank saddling his horse outside. She threw on her robe and hurried to the door just as he was mounting up. "Frank," she called, her voice still rough with sleep. He turned, silhouetted against the pink dawn sky. "I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." She clutched her robe tighter, suddenly aware of her undressed state. Be careful in town," he nodded, tipping his hat. "Always am, madam." As he rode away, Elizabeth felt an inexplicable sense of loss, as if she'd already made her decision but couldn't admit it yet. The day passed slowly. Elizabeth kept the children busy with chores and lessons, but her mind repeatedly drifted to Frank and his proposition. By late afternoon, when he still hadn't returned, she began to worry. "When is Mr. Frank coming back?" Henry asked as he helped her gather eggs. "Soon, I expect," Elizabeth replied, though uncertainty gnawed at her. It was nearly dark when the sound of approaching horses drew her to the window. Her heart sank when she saw not Frank, but Everett Donovan and 2 other men riding toward the cabin. "Children, go to your room," she said firmly, reaching for Jacob's old shotgun above the door. "Stay there until I call you." She stepped onto the porch, shotgun lowered but ready as Donovan dismounted. "Mrs. Winters," he greeted her, eyeing the weapon. "That's hardly necessary." "What brings you here at this hour, Mr. Donovan?" "I've come with news about your friend." Donovan's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. "It seems Mr. Xavier has quite a colorful past. A wanted man in Texas, I'm told." Elizabeth's grip tightened on the shotgun. "Is that so?" "Indeed. The town council was most disturbed when the telegram arrived this afternoon. Naturally, they've withdrawn their offer of employment." Donovan stepped closer. "I felt you should be warned about the company you're keeping." "Where is he?" Elizabeth demanded, fear rising in her throat. "Last I saw, he was at the saloon." Donovan's voice dripped with false concern. "Not the behavior of a man planning to return to a respectable woman's home, I would think." Before Elizabeth could respond, another rider appeared on the road. Frank, his horse at a gallop. He pulled up sharply at the sight of Donovan and his companions. "What's going on here?" Frank's hand hovered near his gun. "Just paying a neighborly visit," Donovan replied smoothly. "Sharing some interesting information that came over the wire today about a certain bounty in Texas." Frank's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "I've already explained that situation to Mrs. Winters." "Have you?" Donovan looked between them. "How very open of you." "I think you should leave now," Elizabeth said, raising the shotgun slightly. Donovan stepped back, his smile fading. "As you wish. But remember, your payment is due in 10 days, and I doubt your gunslinger friend will be welcome in Verde much longer." After they rode away, Frank dismounted slowly, as if carrying a great weight. "I'm sorry, Elizabeth. I didn't want it to happen this way." She lowered the shotgun, suddenly exhausted. "Come inside. The children have been asking for you." Inside the cabin, Henry and Mary rushed to greet Frank, their earlier instructions forgotten in their excitement. He knelt to receive their hugs, his face softening in a way that made Elizabeth's heart twist. "Did you get the marshal job?" Henry asked eagerly. Frank ruffled the boy's hair. "Not this time, partner, but that's all right. There are other ways a man can make his way." Later, when the children were finally asleep, Elizabeth and Frank sat at the table, voices lowered. "The whole town knows now," Frank said grimly. Donovan made sure of it. Did you really go to the saloon? She couldn't keep the disappointment from her voice. Yes, but not for drinking. I was looking for work, any work. When the marshal job fell through, I thought maybe the livery needed help or the freight office. He rubbed his face wearily. No one would hire me once that telegram came in. What will you do now? That depends on you, Elizabeth. His eyes met hers across the table. My offer still stands. I meant what I said last night. Elizabeth stood, moving to the window to gaze out at the stars scattered across the vast Montana sky. For so long, she'd been alone in her struggle, carrying the weight of her children's future on her shoulders. Now, a man she barely knew was offering to share that burden, but at what cost? If I marry you, she said slowly, and someone comes looking for you. I'd never let harm come to you or the children, Frank promised, and if necessary, I'd leave to draw trouble away. That's not very comforting, she whispered. Frank moved to stand beside her, close but not touching. I know it's not ideal. I know I'm asking a lot. But Elizabeth, I think we could build something good here, something that works for all of us. She turned to face him. I need to know one thing, Frank. Is this just about helping us, about having a ready-made family? Because I can't marry a man out of gratitude or desperation. No, he said simply. It's not just that. Then what is it? Frank hesitated as if searching for the right words. I've spent 12 years drifting, never belonging anywhere or to anyone. These past weeks, being here with you and the children for the first time since the war, I've felt peace. I've felt home. Elizabeth studied his face, the lines etched by sun and hardship, the steady gray eyes that had seen too much, the mouth that rarely smiled but spoke honest words. The children need time to know you better, she said finally, and so do I. Is that a yes? Hope flickered across his features. It's a maybe, Elizabeth replied. But Donovan won't accept maybes. We need to make a decision soon. The next morning, Frank rode into Helena, returning 3 days later with a leather pouch of gold coins and a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. $220, he said, placing the pouch on the table. Enough to pay off Donovan and have a little left over. How did you get this? Elizabeth asked, stunned. I had savings in a bank in Helena, been adding to it for years, never knowing what I was saving for. He pushed the pouch toward her. Now I know. Elizabeth stared at the money that would save their home. Frank, I can't accept this without giving me an answer, he nodded. I understand. That evening, after supper, Elizabeth took the children for a walk to the small family graveyard where Jacob was buried. As they placed wildflowers on his simple marker, she knelt beside them. Children, I need to talk to you about something important, she began. You know, Mr. Frank has been helping us a great deal. They nodded, their young faces solemn in the golden light of sunset. He's offered to stay and help us keep our home, to be part of our family. Elizabeth chose her words carefully. He would be like a new father to you. Would we call him Papa? Mary asked, her small brow furrowed. Only if you wanted to someday. For now, you could still call him Mr. Frank. Henry looked at his father's grave, then back at his mother. Would Papa be mad? Elizabeth's throat tightened. No, darling. Your father loved you very much. He would want us to be happy and safe. I like Mr. Frank, Henry said decisively. He teaches me things like Papa did. He gives good hugs, Mary added, and he doesn't yell when I spill things. Elizabeth smiled through the tears that threatened. So you would be all right if he stayed with us? If he became part of our family? Both children nodded, and Elizabeth felt a weight lift from her heart. She looked at Jacob's grave, silently asking for his blessing, feeling in her heart that he would understand. When they returned to the cabin, Frank was sitting on the porch steps, whittling another toy, a small doll for Mary this time. He stood as they approached, his expression questioning. "Children, go wash up for bed," Elizabeth said. When they were inside, she turned to Frank. "The money you brought, we'll use it to pay off the bank note." He nodded, waiting. "And yes," she continued, her voice steady now, "I'll marry you, Frank Xavier, not just for the children or the land, but because I believe we might find happiness together." The smile that broke across his face transformed him, erasing years of loneliness and hardship. He stepped forward, taking her hands in his. "Elizabeth, I promise you won't regret this." "I have conditions," she said, still practical despite the flutter in her chest. "We'll wait a month before the wedding. The children need time, and so do we, and you'll be honest with me, always no more secrets." "Agreed," Frank said solemnly, "and I have something for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small package he'd brought from Helena. "It's not fancy, but—" Elizabeth unwrapped the paper to find a simple silver band. "Oh, Frank, I know it's too soon for love," he said quietly. "But I respect you, Elizabeth. I admire your courage, your devotion to your children. I think in time love will grow." She slipped the ring onto her finger, surprised at how right it felt. "I think so too." The following day they rode together into town, the children dressed in their Sunday best. Their first stop was the bank, where Elizabeth took great satisfaction in placing the exact amount of their debt on Everett Donovan's desk. "I believe this settles our account, Mr. Donovan," she said, unable to keep a note of triumph from her voice. Donovan counted the money slowly, his face pinched with disappointment. "It appears to be in order, Mrs. Winters." His eyes flicked to Frank, standing protectively behind her. "Though I'm curious where a woman in your circumstances came by such a sum." "That's not your concern," Frank said evenly. "The debt is paid. I trust you'll provide a receipt showing the account is closed." Donovan's mouth tightened, but he wrote out the receipt and slid it across the desk. As they turned to leave, he called after them. "I hope you know what you're getting into, Mrs. Winters. A man with his reputation is the man I've chosen to marry," Elizabeth finished for him, her head high as she took Frank's arm. "Good day, Mr. Donovan." Their next stop was Pastor Gillespie's small house beside the church. The pastor welcomed them warmly, though his eyebrows rose at their announcement. "Marriage is a sacred covenant," he said after they'd explained their intentions. "Not to be entered into lightly, especially under unusual circumstances." "We understand that, Pastor," Frank replied. "And we're not taking this step lightly." "Elizabeth," the pastor asked gently, "it's been less than a year since Jacob's passing. Are you certain this is what you want?" Elizabeth met his gaze steadily. "Jacob would want us to survive, to thrive, and yes, I'm certain." Pastor Gillespie nodded slowly. "Very well. A month of banns is traditional anyway. It will give the town time to adjust to the idea." As they left the pastor's house, Elizabeth was acutely aware of the curious stares from townsfolk. Whispers followed them down the street, but she held her head high, Frank's steady presence beside her a shield against gossip. "Mama," Mary tugged at her skirt as they passed the general store. "Can we get candy?" Elizabeth hesitated, counting the coins in her purse. Frank noticed and quietly handed Henry a penny for each child. "Go ahead, but mind your manners," he instructed. As the children darted into the store, Abigail Foster approached, her kind face concerned. "Elizabeth, may I speak with you a moment?" "Alone," Frank nodded. "I'll check on the children." Once he was inside the store, Abigail took Elizabeth's hands. "Is it true you're marrying him?" "Yes," Elizabeth confirmed, "in a month's time. But the telegram, they say he's wanted in Texas." "It was a fair fight, Abigail, and it was years ago." The schoolteacher searched her face. "You seem very certain of him." "I am." Elizabeth smiled slightly. "He's a good man. He's kind to the children, and he's helped us when no one else would." Abigail squeezed her hands. Then I'm happy for you, and if anyone in this town gives you trouble, they'll answer to me." The month that followed was filled with preparations not just for a wedding, but for building a life together. Frank threw himself into improving the homestead, repairing the barn, planting a late crop of hardy vegetables for the fall, and trading one of Elizabeth's quilts for a milk cow. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, getting to know each other as the children played in the yard. Frank told her about his childhood in Missouri, his service during the war, and his years with the Rangers. Elizabeth shared stories of her life before Jacob, her dreams for the children and her fears for the future. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted between them. A lingering glance, a brush of hands when passing the coffee pot, a shared smile at one of Mary's antics. Elizabeth found herself watching for Frank's return when he rode to town, missing his deep voice when he was out mending fences. One evening, as they walked along the creek that bordered the property, Frank stopped to skip a stone across the water. "I got a letter today," he said, watching the ripples spread. "From an old ranger friend in Texas." Elizabeth tensed. "Bad news." "Actually, no." Frank turned to face her. "The man I killed, his family's influence has waned. The governor issued a pardon last year clearing my name. My friend just found out. So you're not wanted anymore." Relief flooded through her. "Apparently not." He shook his head, wonderment in his voice. "All these years running, and I could have gone home any time this past year. Where is home for you?" Elizabeth asked, suddenly afraid of his answer. Frank looked at her for a long moment. "Right here if you'll still have me, now that you know I'm not bringing trouble to your door." "Is that the only reason you offered marriage? Because you felt responsible for us?" "No, Elizabeth." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "That might have been part of it at first, but now I can't imagine being anywhere else or with anyone else." The sincerity in his eyes took her breath away. "Frank, I know it's soon," he said quietly. "I know your heart still holds Jacob's memory. But if you'll give me the chance, I'd like to earn a place there too." Without thinking, Elizabeth reached up to touch his weathered cheek. "You already have." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Frank lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle, questioning, a promise rather than a demand. When they parted, Elizabeth's heart was racing, but not from fear. "I think," she whispered, "that we're going to be all right." The day of the wedding dawned clear and cool, with the first hint of autumn in the air. Elizabeth wore her best dress, freshly pressed, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Frank had a new shirt and had trimmed his beard, his eyes bright with nervous anticipation as he waited at the front of the church. The townspeople filled the pews, some out of support, others from curiosity. Abigail Foster sat in the front row, beaming, while Everett Donovan sulked near the back. Henry stood proudly beside Frank, taking his role as man of the family seriously, while Mary scattered flower petals down the aisle before her mother. As Elizabeth walked toward her future husband, she felt Jacob's presence not as a shadow or a regret, but as a blessing. He had given her 5 good years and 2 beautiful children. Now she was choosing to embrace life again, to accept the unexpected gift of a second chance. Pastor Gillespie's words echoed in the simple church. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." As Frank slipped the silver band onto her finger, this time permanently, and kissed her as his wife, Elizabeth felt a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. That evening, after a small celebration at the homestead with a few friends from town, Elizabeth put the sleepy children to bed. When she returned to the main room, Frank was standing by the fireplace, staring into the flames. "Second thoughts?" she asked softly. He turned, his expression clearing as he saw her. "Never. Just thinking about how much has changed in such a short time. 2 months ago, I was tracking rustlers, no ties, no future beyond the next job. Elizabeth moved to stand beside him, taking his hand. And now I have everything I never knew I wanted. He drew her close. A home, a family, a wife. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other with tenderness and growing passion. Elizabeth had feared she might feel disloyal to Jacob's memory, but instead she found healing in Frank's gentle strength, in his whispered words of admiration and desire. Later, lying in his arms, she whispered, "I didn't expect this. When Jacob died, I thought that part of my life was over." Frank stroked her hair, spread like copper across his chest. "Life has a way of surprising us. You think you'll miss it. The freedom of the trail, the excitement of the chase," he considered this. "There might be days when I do, but I've had my fill of loneliness, Elizabeth. What we're building here, it's worth more than any adventure." As autumn deepened into winter, the Xavier family settled into a rhythm. Frank proved to be a natural father, patient with Mary's endless questions and proud of Henry's quick learning. The boy followed him everywhere, soaking up knowledge about horses, carpentry, and the land. Frank found work with the freighting company, making regular runs between Verdi and Helena. Though the hours were long, the pay was steady, and he was home most nights. Elizabeth started selling butter and eggs to the hotel in town, adding to their modest income. One snowy evening in December, as they sat by the fire mending harnesses and darning socks, Frank looked up suddenly. "I've been thinking," he said. "We should add on to the cabin come spring. The children need more room and—" He hesitated. "And," Elizabeth prompted, "and maybe we might need more room ourselves, someday." His eyes held a question. Elizabeth set down her darning. "Frank Xavier, are you asking if I want more children?" A slow smile spread across his face. "I suppose I am." She moved to sit beside him, taking his rough hand in hers. "I'd like that very much. A child of our own alongside Henry and Mary. You know, I couldn't love them more if they were my own blood," he said seriously. "I know." She rested her head on his shoulder. "They love you too. Did you hear Mary yesterday? She called you Papa for the first time. I heard." His voice was gruff with emotion. Best sound in the world, spring arrived with new beginnings. Construction began on the cabin addition, with neighbors helping to raise the walls in exchange for Elizabeth's cooking. The vegetable garden expanded, and Frank traded one of his prized pistols for a team of oxen to help work the fields. In May, when wildflowers carpeted the hills, Elizabeth shared the news she'd suspected for weeks: they would welcome a new baby in the winter. Frank's joy was boundless, his protective instincts heightened as he insisted she rest more and lift less. "I'm with child, not made of china," she laughed one afternoon as he took a heavy basket from her hands. "Humor me," he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I missed these moments with Henry and Mary. I don't want to miss a thing this time." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall. Henry and Mary were excited about the baby, though Mary worried there might not be enough love to go around. "Your heart will grow," Frank assured her as they sat on the porch one evening. "Just like the garden grows more vegetables each year because we add more seeds. Love works the same way." In December, as a snowstorm howled outside, Elizabeth's labor began. Frank rode through the blizzard to fetch the midwife, returning half frozen but determined not to leave his wife's side again. After hours of labor, as the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, their son was born, a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair in his father's gray eyes. "What shall we name him?" Elizabeth asked, cradling the infant to her breast. Frank touched the tiny hand that curled around his finger with surprising strength. "Jacob," he said without hesitation, "to honor the man who came before me, the man who gave you Henry and Mary." Tears filled Elizabeth's eyes. Jacob Francis Xavier. A good, strong name. As spring returned to Montana, the Xavier homestead flourished. New livestock filled the expanded barn, and the fields promised a bountiful harvest. In town, Frank had earned respect through hard work and fair dealing, his past no longer the subject of whispers. One warm evening, as they sat on the porch watching the children play, Henry teaching Mary to throw a ball while baby Jake slept in Elizabeth's arms, Frank took his wife's hand. "Do you remember what you said to me that first time I suggested marriage?" Elizabeth smiled. "I said many things, as I recall. You whispered, 'My children need a father.'" His thumb traced circles on her palm. "And I told you I needed a family. I remember." "I was wrong," Frank said softly. Elizabeth looked at him, startled. "Wrong? I didn't just need a family, I needed this family. You, Henry, Mary, and now Jake." He gazed out at the land they'd nurtured together. "I needed you, Elizabeth Xavier." She leaned into his strength, watching their children play in the golden light of sunset. "And we needed you, more than I could have imagined." As twilight deepened into night, the stars emerged above their home, bright points of light in the vast Montana sky, guiding travelers and dreamers alike. But Frank Xavier no longer needed guidance. After years of wandering, he had found his true north in the family he'd never expected, and the love he'd never thought to find. And Elizabeth, who had once feared she would lose everything, had instead gained a full heart, a thriving home, and the certainty that sometimes the end of one journey is simply the beautiful beginning of another.